coffee cup trembled. The tremor was not induced by the rumble of the yellow tram rattling down Rua Augusta, its electric motor whining, but by the profound, systemic quake in the man's hand. He was 50, perhaps 60, with the pallid, waxy skin of a man who lives indoors, away from the unforgiving Brazilian sun, and the haunted, darting eyes of someone who expects a ghost or an assassin around every corner. Agent Ephraim, known for the past 27 days in Sao Paulo as Mr. Daniel Fisher, a mid-level manager for a Tel Aviv-based textile import-export firm, kept his own hands perfectly still. They were wrapped around a glass of iced water, the condensation providing a cool, solid anchor in the humid, oppressive air. The man across the table, his informant, was named Klaus Richter. He was a low-level archivist in the city's Departamento de Ordem Política e Social, the DOPS, the Immigration and Political Records Office. He smelled of cheap cachaça, stale sweat, and a fear so potent it was almost a physical presence. A third person at their small, wrought-iron table. For a promised 2,000 German marks, a sum that could buy him a new life far from the ghosts he catalogued, he had guaranteed a name. Not just any name, but a new name for an old monster. A name that Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunting architect from Vienna, had been chasing with relentless, almost biblical fury for 18 years. A name that belonged to the Commandant of Treblinka, the SS Hauptsturmführer, who had perfected the industrial process of murder with the detached efficiency of a factory foreman. Klaus licked his chapped lips. His eyes, small and porcine, flickered towards the cafe's entrance, then back to the worn leather briefcase at Ephraim's feet. "The money," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp that was barely audible over the clatter of porcelain and the musical murmur of Portuguese. Ephraim didn't move a muscle. His instructions from Tel Aviv, delivered via a coded one-time pad transmission that was burned after reading, were unequivocal. See the physical file first. Verification before payment. It was Mossad operational doctrine, Rule 101, etched into the brain of every Katza during the brutal training at the academy. But this was not a textbook situation. Klaus was sweating through his cheap linen shirt in the artificially cooled cafe. He had been followed. He was certain of it. "They know," he hissed, leaning forward, his breath a foul wave of alcohol and panic. "The Kameradenwerk. They know I copied the file." The Kameradenwerk, the comrades' work. A deceptively benign name for a powerful and ruthless mutual aid society for former SS and Nazi party members. It was a clandestine network that provided fugitives with money, forged documents, escape routes, and, when necessary, silence. They buried secrets and they buried threats. Ephraim's heart rate, monitored by his own consciousness as a matter of professional discipline, remained a steady 60 beats per minute. His training at Mossad headquarters had conditioned his physiological responses to stress. But his mind was a blur of calculations, a high-speed game of chess played against a ticking clock. If Klaus bolted now, this lead, the most promising in almost 2 decades, was dead. 18 years of painstaking research by Wiesenthal, culminating in this sweaty, anonymous cafe, would evaporate into the South American haze. The entire mission, codenamed Zephyr, a designation chosen for its ephemeral nature, hinged on the next 30 seconds of psychological warfare. "Show me the file, Klaus," Ephraim said, his German calm and level, the voice of a reasonable businessman about to conclude a transaction. "Then you receive your payment and a ticket to any destination that doesn't have an extradition treaty with Brazil or Germany, as we agreed." Klaus shook his head, a frantic bird-like motion that threatened to dislodge it from his neck. No. No file. It was too dangerous to bring. I destroyed the copy. He was panicking, and his lies were becoming sloppy, transparent. Just a name. I saw it. On the 1951 entry visa application. The file number is 7N342. It was processed through the consulate in Damascus. The photograph matches the one you gave me. The details were a clumsy attempt at verisimilitude. A Syrian visa was a hallmark of the rat lines run by Bishop Alois Hudal from Rome. But Damascus was a major issuing post. The file number was a nice touch. But his refusal to produce the physical copy was the ultimate red flag. Amateurs and liars forget that in this business, paper is everything. The physical document is the truth. Everything else is rumor. Ephraim had 10 seconds to make a choice. Option 1. Adhere to protocol. Insist on physical verification. Risk Klaus running, disappearing forever into the sprawling, chaotic metropolis of 6 million people. The lead would be cold within an hour. Option 2. Break protocol. Pay him for the unverified name. Risk the 2,000 marks, a significant portion of the operation's discretionary budget. Risk the information being false. A ghost story sold by a desperate, terrified alcoholic, which would earn him a severe reprimand from Tel Aviv and the potential scrubbing of the mission. But there was a third option. The one they don't teach you in the formal training courses. The one that lives in the gray space between rules and results. The space where missions are either won or lost spectacularly. Ephraim slowly slid his right foot forward, hooking it around the leg of Klaus's rickety wooden chair, anchoring him in place with a subtle, undeniable physical check. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was for Klaus alone. You're right to be scared, Klaus. They are watching. But not just you. He paused, letting the silence and the implications of his words hang in the humid air. He saw the flicker of confusion replacing the raw fear in Klaus's eyes. They're watching me too. My people. And they have a different protocol for informants who waste our time and compromise an operation. They don't just stop paying. They stop problems. Permanently. It was a complete, audacious fabrication. His backup was a single operative, Maya, parked in a Volkswagen Beetle 2 blocks away on Avenida Ipiranga, monitoring police frequencies and providing long-range surveillance. She couldn't see or hear a thing inside the cafe. But fear was a universal currency, and Ephraim was an expert in its exchange. Klaus went rigid. The tremor in his hand ceased. He stared at Ephraim, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a buyer of information, but as a predator far more dangerous than the aging Nazis he feared. The bluff had landed with the force of a physical blow. The name, Ephraim commanded, his voice now cold steel, the businessman replaced by the operative. Klaus swallowed hard. The sound was audible over the clatter of a nearby waiter dropping a tray of glasses. He leaned in so close, Ephraim could smell the decay on his teeth. Stangle, he whispered, the name a puff of foul air. Franz Stangle. He never changed it. His wife Teresa and their daughters. They all live under the Stangle name. It's in the file. He works at the Volkswagen factory in São Bernardo do Campo. The name landed in the cramped, smoke-filled offices of Mossad headquarters on King Saul Boulevard in Tel Aviv, like a grenade with the pin pulled. Franz Paul Stangle, the White Death of Treblinka. He was not a rabid, frothing sadist like so many of his contemporaries. He was something far more modern and terrifying. An administrator of annihilation. A career policeman from Austria who ran a factory of death with the cold, detached efficiency of a logistics manager, overseeing the murder of nearly 1 million men, women, and children. He was known for his crisp white riding jacket and the whip he carried but rarely used. He didn't need to. His system was the weapon. For 2 decades, he was a phantom. A thick file in a cabinet in Vienna. A ghost story told by the handful of survivors who had clawed their way out of his meticulously organized hell. The hunt for Stangle was not a new operation. It was a cold case, a file gathering dust, a national wound that refused to heal. To understand why Mossad, an agency stretched thin by immediate existential threats from Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt and a resurgent Syria, would reactivate a high-risk, low-priority manhunt in South America. One must understand the 2 men who willed it into existence from opposite ends of the world. First, there was the man outside the agency, the relentless engine of the entire affair, Simon Wiesenthal. He was not a spy. He was an architect by training, a survivor of the Mauthausen concentration camp who had lost 89 members of his family to the Holocaust. After the war, he did not seek vengeance, a passion he considered fleeting. He sought justice, a concept he equated with memory and documentation. He opened a small, underfunded Jewish Historical Documentation Center in Linz, then Vienna, armed with nothing but thousands of index cards, a rotary telephone, and an inhuman capacity for remembering names, dates, and connections. While the world's great powers were consumed by the Cold War, Wiesenthal was building a different kind of intelligence network. It was composed of whispers from other survivors, confessional letters from repentant low-level Nazis, and tips from informants paid with funds he scraped together from Jewish donors. He was a librarian of evil, cross-referencing lists of SS officers with post-war immigration records, building a vast, interconnected web of complicity. He had chased Stangle's ghost for years. He had meticulously tracked him from his role as superintendent at the Hartheim Castle Euthanasia Center, a key facility in the Nazis' T4 program to murder the disabled, to the killing fields of Sobibor, and then to the industrialized slaughter of Treblinka. He followed the trail to Italy after the war, where it went cold thanks to the infamous rat lines operated by sympathetic clergy like Bishop Hudal, who saw the SS men as holy warriors against godless Bolshevism. For years, the Stangle file was a collection of dead ends, a rumored sighting in Damascus, a false lead in Argentina, a report of his death in Egypt. Wiesenthal was a bulldog. He never let go. His persistence was a moral force, but to the Israeli government, it was also a strategic annoyance. He would send letters, make phone calls, and use his contacts in the international press to publicly shame them into action, reminding them of the debt owed to the 6 million. Inside the agency, the philosophy of that debt had been forged in steel and secrecy by one man, Isser Harel. Though no longer the director of Mossad in 1964, his shadow, his doctrine, loomed over the entire institution. Harel was the architect of the 1960 abduction of Adolf Eichmann from Argentina. That operation, codenamed Finale, was more than a mission. It was a declaration of national purpose. It broadcast to the world, and to every Nazi hiding from Brazil to Egypt, that for the crimes of the Holocaust, there were no statutes of limitation and no safe havens. Harel, a small, unassuming man who looked more like an accountant than a spy master, believed in a simple, brutal calculus. The State of Israel was the sole executor of the Jewish people's historical will, and that will demanded accountability. His agents were not just intelligence officers. They were instruments of that will. He trained them to be chameleons, to operate in hostile territory with minimal support, to be both intellectually sharp and physically ruthless. The agent in the Sao Paulo cafe, Ephraim, was a product of Harl's school. His real name was Zvi Aharoni, a German-born, fluent speaker who had been one of the key operatives in the Eichmann capture, the very man who had physically identified the target on a street in Buenos Aires. He was a specialist in human intelligence, the delicate art of turning, reading, and manipulating people. His partner, Maya, whose real name was Yael Cohen, was a signals and surveillance expert, a master of the era's clunky but effective technology. She was not merely a technician. She was a field-tested operative of exceptional caliber. Her legend within the agency had been cemented 2 years earlier during a tense operation in Cairo. Posing as a French journalist, she was tasked with placing a listening device in the office of a German rocket scientist working on Nasser's ballistic missile program, part of the larger, desperate intelligence war known as Operation Damocles. The plan went sideways when her primary device, a state-of-the-art bug disguised as a power outlet, failed its pre-op check. With only hours before the target office would be sealed for the weekend, she improvised. Using a razor blade, a spool of copper wire stripped from a hotel lamp, and a miniature microphone from her purse, she transformed the scientist's own telephone receiver into a crude but effective hot mic, powered by the phone line's own current. She performed this delicate electronic surgery in a cramped utility closet, guided by frantic, whispered instructions from a tech in Tel Aviv over a crackling shortwave radio link. Her coolness under that pressure was why she was on this mission. She was the one who could make the technology work when it inevitably decided to fail. The mission's genesis was not a dramatic cable from a field agent, but a crumpled airmail letter that arrived at Wiesenthal's Vienna office in early 1964. It was from a man in Brazil, a fellow Austrian expatriate and former Nazi acquaintance of Stangle's. He claimed to have seen Stangle's wife, Teresa, at a social gathering. He mentioned the street where she lived in Sao Paulo. He demanded money for more information. It was one of dozens of such letters Wiesenthal received each month. Most were hoaxes or cruel pranks. But this one contained a detail that caught his meticulous eye. It mentioned Stangle's eldest daughter and the specific married name she was now using. A quick, discreet check of Austrian public records confirmed the daughter's existence and her marriage. It was a tiny, verifiable hook, but it was enough. Wiesenthal took the information to the Israeli consulate in Vienna. The initial response from Tel Aviv was lukewarm. The Eichmann trial, with its global headlines, was over. The nation was focused on the present. The chessboard, as the director of operations called it, was dangerously crowded. Operation Damocles in Egypt was consuming vast resources, trying to sabotage Nasser's missile ambitions. In the north, a shadow war was being fought against Syria over its attempts to divert the headwaters of the Jordan River, a project that Israel viewed as an existential threat. Mossad teams were running cross-border sabotage missions, and a major military confrontation seemed imminent. Hunting a single, aging Nazi seemed like a strategic luxury they could not afford. A fierce debate raged within Mossad's headquarters. The new director, Meir Amit, was a pragmatist, a former general who viewed intelligence through a military lens of risk versus reward. The risks were immense. A diplomatic firestorm with Brazil if they were caught. The potential compromise of other, more critical intelligence networks in South America focused on Arab diaspora activities, and the physical danger to the agents. The reward? The capture of one man, whose death or imprisonment would not change the strategic map of the Middle East by 1 inch. But the old guard, The veterans of the Haganah and the disciples of Harel argued passionately. This was not about strategy. It was about the fundamental mission of the state. It was about memory. It was about the promise of never again. A compromise was hammered out. Amit authorized a Phase 1 operation only, a 2-person team, a minimal budget. The objective was not to capture, kill, or extract. It was simply to locate, verify, and report. Find the ghost. Prove he's real. Then, and only then, would they decide on Phase 2. Operation Zephyr was a go. Ephraim and Maya were dispatched to Sao Paulo, not with guns and cyanide pills, but with business cards and a meticulously constructed cover story. They were representatives of Fisher Textiles, an Israeli company looking to source high-grade Brazilian cotton. They were armed with a single, grainy, 20-year-old photograph of SS Hauptsturmführer Franz Stangle and a street name where his wife might be living. Their hunt began not with a high-speed chase, but with a city phone book. The plan in motion felt less like an espionage thriller and more like a tedious, underfunded business startup. Ephraim and Maya landed at Congonhas Airport and passed through customs as Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, a plausible, slightly weary couple on a trade mission. Their first week was a masterclass in legend building. They held meetings with actual textile exporters, toured cotton processing plants, and filled notebooks with genuine details about thread counts, shipping logistics, and tariff regulations. They rented a modest apartment in the Jardins district, a location that fit their cover story. Not flashy enough to attract attention, not poor enough to seem out of place. They opened a local bank account. They purchased a car, a Brazilian-made Volkswagen Beetle, the most ubiquitous vehicle on the road, chosen for its absolute anonymity. Every action was designed to create a legitimate, verifiable, and utterly boring footprint in the city's official records. Only then did the real work begin. The lead from Wiesenthal's informant was a street name, Rua Tuin. It was a quiet, middle-class street lined with small, whitewashed houses and blooming jacaranda trees. The first phase of surveillance was entirely passive. For 3 days, from dawn until after dusk, Maya sat in the Beetle, parked a block away, where she had a clean line of sight. She used a pair of powerful Steiner 8X30 binoculars, noting every arrival and departure. She photographed every person who entered or left the house mentioned in the letter. Using a Leica M3 with a 135mm lens, the longest she could effectively use without drawing attention. At night, in their apartment's bathroom, which they had converted into a makeshift darkroom with black cloth and a dim red bulb, they developed the rolls of film. The sharp, acrid smell of fixer chemical filled the small space as they hung the wet contact sheets to dry, then examined each face with a magnifying loupe, comparing them to the aged photograph of Stangle. Nothing. The residents were a young Brazilian family with 2 small children. The lead was a bust. It was a demoralizing, expensive start. Their budget was finite. Every day spent chasing a phantom was a day closer to the mission being scrubbed by the accountants in Tel Aviv. They moved to Phase 2, the paper chase. This was Ephraim's domain. He spent days on end at the city's central records office, feigning research for a business directory. The heat in the non-air-conditioned building was stifling. The bureaucracy a labyrinth of indifferent clerks and missing files. He searched for any record of Franz or Teresa Stangle. He searched for their known aliases from the immediate post-war period. Nothing. He cross-referenced immigration records from 1951, the year Klaus had mentioned. He found hundreds of Austrian and German immigrants, but no Stangle. It felt as if the family had stepped off the boat from Genoa and simply vanished into thin air. Weeks turned into a month. Their coded reports to Tel Aviv were grim. No progress. Leads exhausted. Awaiting further instructions. The reply was always the same terse command. Continue for another 72 hours. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Frustrated with the official records, which could have been altered or lost by the Kameradenwerk, Ephraim shifted focus. He started looking for the daughter, using the married name provided in the original informant's letter. He painstakingly searched marriage registries, utility company records, birth certificates. Finally, after a week of mind-numbing archival work, he got a hit. A woman with that name had registered the birth of a child 2 years prior. The address listed on the birth certificate was not on Rua Tuin. It was on a different street, in a different neighborhood. Rua Alagoas. They had been watching the wrong house for a month. The new surveillance post was an apartment they rented across the street, offering a clear, unobstructed view into the target's home. The technology they used was state-of-the-art for 1964, which meant it was cumbersome, temperamental, and unreliable. Their primary visual tool was a Zeiss Icon Contarex bullseye camera, a heavy mechanical beast fitted with a monstrous 1000 Zeiss Miritar telephoto lens. The lens was the size of a small bazooka and had to be mounted on a heavy tripod bolted to the floor. To use it without being seen, they had to remove a pane of glass from their apartment window and replace it with a perfectly clean, non-reflective pane of optical glass they had specially cut. They draped the entire room in black cloth to prevent any internal reflections from giving away their position. Taking a picture was a two-person job. Ephraim would aim and focus the monstrous lens, a task that required minute, delicate adjustments, while Maya would watch the street with binoculars, giving him the signal to shoot at the precise moment the target was in the clear. Their audio surveillance was even more primitive. They had a Nagra 3 reel-to-reel tape recorder, a device the size of a shoebox, concealed in a modified briefcase. Its battery life was under 2 hours, and the tape reels had to be changed manually. Every piece of equipment had a limitation, a potential point of failure. This technological fragility created a constant, underlying tension. Every photograph was precious. Every second of recording was a gamble. Their new target was a modest, single-story home. For a week, they watched the mundane life of the family unfold. They saw a woman, Teresa Stangle, her face older but unmistakably the same as in her file photographs, and her daughter. They saw a grandchild playing in the small yard. But they never saw the man. The first major setback landed like a physical blow. A cable arrived from Tel Aviv. It was short, brutal, and encrypted with the highest level code. Mission compromised. Vienna assets silenced. Return immediately. They later learned through back channels that Simon Wiesenthal, in his eagerness and frustration, had sent a follow-up letter to his original informant in Brazil. The letter was intercepted, likely by corrupt postal workers on the Kameradenwerk payroll. The informant was found dead in an alley. His death officially ruled a robbery gone wrong. Mossad was furious. The amateur had interfered, and now the entire network in Brazil could be at risk. The Kameradenwerk would be on high alert. Stangle, if he was even there, would be spirited away. Ephraim and Maya were ordered to pack. Their flight was booked for the following night. They had 24 hours to salvage something, anything, from the operation. Desperate, Ephraim decided on a high-risk, unsanctioned gambit. They couldn't get a picture of Stangle, so they would try to get his voice, or at least confirmation of his presence. Using a contact at the Brazilian telephone company, a man they had cultivated and bribed weeks earlier for just such a contingency. They arranged for an emergency line repair on the street. Maya, dressed in the blue overalls of a telephone company employee, would tap the line at the junction box on the pole. Ephraim would then call the house, pretending to be a German-speaking official from the Austrian consulate, asking a series of dry bureaucratic questions about pension regulations that would hopefully entice the man of the house to speak. The plan almost collapsed before it began. As Maya opened the junction box, a metal cabinet humming with a spiderweb of colored wires, she discovered the problem. The simple induction coil tap, designed to pick up the magnetic field generated by the voice signal on the line, was getting nothing but static. The wiring was old, the signal weak and corroded. The tech had failed. She radioed Ephraim. "No signal. The induction coil is useless on this line. I need a hard tap." A hard tap meant physically splicing into the target's telephone line, a far riskier and more detectable procedure. It also required a different piece of equipment, a set of specific resistors they didn't have. The mission was dead, but Maya refused to quit. "Tel Aviv," she whispered into her radio. "Get Gad on the line, now." Gad was Mossad's legendary head of technical services, a man who could build a transmitter out of a wristwatch. Within minutes, he was on a secure radio link from a basement workshop in Tel Aviv, his voice a tinny, distant guide. "Yael, listen to me. Open the Nagra's power supply. You see the main resistor pack? R7. It's 1.5 kilo ohms. Too strong, it will degrade the line signal and they'll hear a click. You need to bypass half of it. Strip the wire from the B line on your headset. You will use it as a jumper. Are you listening? You have to be precise." For 10 agonizing minutes, with Gad's voice in her ear, Maya performed microsurgery inside the cramped junction box, the tropical sun beating down on her back. Using a tiny screwdriver and a pair of tweezers, she rerouted the circuitry, her hands steady despite the immense pressure. "It's done," she finally whispered. "I have a tone." The second setback was even more terrifying and completely unforeseen. Just as she closed the junction box, a green Ford Galaxy, the signature vehicle of the security services, pulled up. 2 men in plain clothes got out. They had the hard, impassive faces of government agents. DOPS, the political police. They hadn't come for the Israeli spies. Their presence was a disastrous coincidence, a routine check on a known union organizer who lived 2 doors down. But they saw Maya. A woman up a telephone pole was unusual. They started asking questions in brusque Portuguese. Ephraim, monitoring from the apartment, heard the conversation. His blood ran cold. He was completely helpless. Maya, a native Portuguese speaker born in Rio before her family emigrated to Israel, handled it with breathtaking composure. She complained about her lazy male colleagues who always sent her on the easy jobs. She flirted harmlessly. She offered them a cold drink for when she was done. She was charming, dismissive, and utterly convincing. But the DOPS men lingered. They were bored, enjoying the distraction. They made small talk. The clock was ticking. Ephraim's window to make the call was closing. After what felt like an eternity, the DOPS agents got a call on their car radio and, with a final wave, drove off. Maya gave Ephraim the signal, a series of 3 sharp clicks on the open line. He took a deep breath and dialed the number. A woman answered. Teresa Stangle. Ephraim launched into his prepared script, a dull monologue about pension regulations for Austrian immigrants who had served in the pre-Anschluss civil service. Teresa was confused, guarded. "My husband handles these things," she said. He's not here. Ephraim's heart sank. He pushed. It's very important, Frau Stangle. There's a deadline. Perhaps you could tell him to expect a call tomorrow morning. I will need his service number. There was a pause. He could hear her muffled voice calling into the house. Franz, it's the consulate about your old pension. A moment later, a man's voice came on the line. It was cautious, irritated, but unmistakably male. Who is this? He demanded in German. Ephraim felt a jolt of electricity. My name is Schmidt, he said, continuing the script. The man on the other end gruffly answered a few questions before cutting him off. I am busy. Send me the papers in the mail. Then he hung up. The call lasted less than 90 seconds, but it was enough. Ephraim hit the stop button on the Nagra recorder. They had a voice. They had confirmation. He was there. Their victory was short-lived. The very next day, a third, catastrophic complication materialized. As Ephraim was walking back from a local market, buying groceries to maintain their cover, a man stepped out of a doorway and blocked his path. He was Argentinian, with a cheap suit and a pockmarked face that Ephraim recognized instantly. Hector Vargas. A corrupt, low-level police inspector in Buenos Aires, whom Ephraim's team had paid handsomely for information, vehicle registrations, police patrol schedules, during the Eichmann operation 4 years earlier. A ghost from a past mission. Aharoni, Vargas said, a greasy smile spreading across his face. He used Ephraim's real name. Fancy seeing you here. I heard you people liked Argentina so much. I thought maybe you came back. But Brazil? You must be very busy, men. The world tilted on its axis. This was an extinction,